Welcome back. Now, with regards to the midterm budget earlier on today in Parliament that was given by the Minister of Finance, Ipumbushimi, will be given a thorough analysis by Simone Storm Securities economist Theo Klein. Good evening, sir, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, in layman's term, is this a well-revised budget that is in alignment of not only cushioning the country's fiscal policies, but addressing the needs and wants of the country's developmental agenda?
I think we were pleasantly surprised by quite a few positive announcements in the budget. Certainly, announcements we were not necessarily expecting, but ones that we have been sort of arguing for government to do. So I think there are certainly positive developments that can benefit the poor or your lower income individuals. But then also, I think what still remains disappointing is that the budget earlier this year in February was centered around the youth, sort of trying to capitalize on the skills of the youth that form the largest part of our population. But I fail to see how the budget really has benefited the youth, how it has been targeted at the youth. You do hear of expenditure items that they have done in the last couple of months, which is all good and well, but I still don't really see how that was well targeted spending towards the youth. So I think that is still a question that remains unanswered, in our opinion.
All right. Now, the minister stated that for the budget to be well on par, it needed to revisit its appropriation bill, with the amendments made. Now, what's your economics 10 points towards these changes?
So, the increase in public salaries was also unbudgeted for. They did not account for that in the beginning of the year. So, and the other thing that we've seen is that quite a few other ministries, we're not too sure exactly who, but we do sort of see Ministry of Education and Health's name appearing in the budget speech. They under budgeted sort of their expenditure estimates for the year. So because of all that shortfall and because of the public salary increases, government had to adjust their budget and reallocate spending from other ministries to try and cover these costs that they've seen increasing. Obviously, we know inflation has not just been bad for the average Namibian consumer or household, but it also does affect the costs of government. So that's also increased their expenditure by more than what they initially expected. So because of all of this, they've had to do reallocation. So what that means is that some ministries might see budget cuts because of the reallocations that have taken place, because government said they're not keen on getting more debt to cover the additional 4 billion that they now need to spend. So, and that was not budgeted for previously. So they don't want to increase debt to do that. So now they're going to do a reallocation. So I think that might also probably be a negative for some of the ministries going forward.
All right. Now, talk to us about some of the areas you had hoped the budget review would have paid attention towards, and perhaps what are the economic repercussions of failing to do so?
So, I mean, we still hear the same story that we've heard since about 2015, 2016, that government is focusing on consolidating fiscal spending. What that means in layman's terms is simply just government trying to cut down on its spending and trying to, curb the growth of its debt. So we still hear that. That's still pretty much the same. But I think, as I said earlier, where we are slightly disappointed is that we would have wanted to see government telling us how exactly the youth were targeted. In the beginning of the year, they mentioned sort of upgrading vocational training centers across the country, trying to upskill the youth. And then they also mentioned Ministry of Education building a student accommodation here in Windhoek, amongst other things. And I mean, I haven't gone through all of the budget documents yet. I still have to do that later on tonight. But my early impressions is that not too much has been done on that front. So I think that's with regards to our disappointments. I think with regards to positive surprises, we've seen government increasing the minimum income tax threshold from 50,000 per annum to 100,000 Namibian dollars per annum. So I think that will definitely be positive for low income earners, because certainly what we've seen in the last couple of years is that our income tax brackets have not been adjusted for inflation. So what does that mean? That means your gardeners, your domestic workers, your any sort of low income earning job that received inflation adjusted salary increases year after year, they probably are now in a position where they need to start paying taxes. I actually do know of some gardeners and cleaners who are eligible to pay tax because their salary is now high enough. They form part of the minimum tax threshold. But now what we've seen is government has increased that minimum tax threshold. So it can be that your low income earners are no longer eligible to pay tax. So I think that it certainly is a positive. However, we are still disappointed that government did not necessarily commit themselves to adjust these income tax brackets on an annual basis going forward. And that's certainly what we would actually ideally hope for. I think another positive is the fact that the corporate taxes have been reduced from 32% to 30%, but it will be phased out. So I think still a positive, but we would probably have said, this should be done sooner and not over a 3-year period, because lowering corporate tax rates will certainly provide some relief to
Mr. Klein?
can actually use some of the money for businesses.
All right, we lost you for a
Sorry,
minute
can
there.
you hear me?
Yes. Now, on a different
Okay.
note, tomorrow the Bank of Namibia is going to speak on the repo rate. Do you think today's budget tabling will have any influence in a positive trajectory?
Not at all. I think we still expect Bank of Namibia to go ahead with hiking the repo rate by 75 basis points, taking it from the current level of 5.5% to 6.25%. That will then take your prime interest rate from the current 9.25% to 10%. I think Bank of Namibia's hand is fairly forced in this move because they simply need to follow the 75 basis points hike that the South African Reserve Bank did in September last month. So I think it's unlikely to affect that. And I don't also see the budget implicating our forecasts on interest rate movements for the end of the year, because we do expect Bank of Namibia to hike by another 75 basis points in December.
All
So
right.
that means we see the prime interest rate ending.
Mr. Klein? Well, would like to thank Mr. Klein for all his
I
input
think
and
what
his
that will
views.
mean is that the average interest rates on your car loans, home loans, will continue to rise for the average Namibian household and business towards the end of the year. I don't see the budget derailing our expectations on that.
All right, Mr. Klein, thank you so much for your view and analysis on the midterm review budget, and also just touching on the repo rate that will be addressed tomorrow.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, that was economist Theo Klein talking to us about this. A few those issues I mentioned earlier. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we touch on health.